She was my maid of honor. 3 years later, she was my husband's second wife. She stood beside me at the altar, holding my bouquet, wiping my tears, and whispering that I was the most beautiful bride she had ever seen. Her name was Folasade, my best friend since we were 11 years old, the girl who knew every secret I had ever buried, every scar I had ever hidden, every dream I had ever dared to speak out loud. And 3 years after she watched me marry the love of my life, she became his second wife. I want you to sit with that for a moment, not a stranger, not some woman he met at work or stumbled upon at a party, the woman who stood closest to me on the best day of my life, the woman who helped me choose my wedding dress, the woman who sat with me at midnight 2 weeks before the ceremony when I was sobbing with stress and she rubbed my back until I could breathe again. The woman who organized my bridal shower and screamed louder than anyone when I walked in and saw the decorations. The woman who danced with me until 2 in the morning at my wedding reception, laughing so hard she spilled palm wine on her lace blouse and did not even pause to care. That woman. My name is Yetunde, and this is my story. I grew up in Ibadan, in a compound house on a street where the walls talked, and the neighbors knew everything about everyone before those people knew it themselves. My mother was a seamstress who worked from a small room at the back of our house, her sewing machine running from morning until the sky went dark. My father drove long-haul trucks and came home in stretched intervals, sometimes weeks apart, and when he came home, the whole house changed its temperature. He was a big man with a big laugh, and his absence was always felt in the space where that laugh should have been. I was the second of 4 children, 2 boys, 2 girls, and I was the quiet one. The one who read too many books and stayed inside her own head and dreamed too many dreams and was always being told she needed to come back to earth. Folasade lived 3 streets away on the other side of a mechanic workshop that smelled of oil and rubber and that we had to walk past every morning on our way to school. We met on the very first day of primary school when we were both 6 years old and frightened and pretending not to be. A boy, I cannot remember his name now, but I remember his face, pulled my braids on the assembly ground. Hard. The kind of pull that brings immediate tears whether you want them or not. Before I could react, before I could even turn around fully, this girl I had never seen in my life marched over and poured her entire bottle of water directly on his head. Not a splash, the full bottle. She upended it with the calm efficiency of someone who had made a decision and was simply executing it. He screamed. She looked at him with complete disinterest. Then she turned to me and said, "He will not do that again." I had never seen anything so bold in my 6 years of life. I fell in love with her instantly, not the romantic kind of love, but the kind that fills your whole chest, the kind that makes you feel like the world is a little safer and more manageable because this particular person exists in it and has decided to be your person. She did not ask if I wanted a friend. She simply became one, the way weather becomes rain, without asking your permission. We grew up inseparable after that. Through primary school, through secondary school, through the anxious years of WAEC and JAMB and university applications, through every landmark and every crisis and every quiet ordinary Tuesday that meant nothing and also meant everything because we went through them together. We failed mathematics in JSS 2 together, cheated off the same textbook during a test I will not name here, and celebrated together in the street outside the school when our SS3 results came in and we had both passed everything we needed. We shared second-hand Daniel Steele novels that we were too young to be reading. We stayed up late whispering about boys, analyzing every text message and every glance across the classroom with the seriousness of scientists studying something of world-altering significance. When my father's truck broke down and the family went through a terrible year where money was a daily emergency, Folasade's mother quietly started sending extra food across to our house, always framed as leftovers or surplus, as though this was accidental generosity and not deliberate grace. When Folasade's parents fought, and sometimes they fought badly, in ways that made the whole compound go quiet and tense, she would appear at our door late at night, and my mother would simply open it wider without asking questions. She would sleep beside me in my small bed, and neither of us would say anything about what we both knew had happened. We had learned early that some things do not need to be spoken to be understood. We simply held space for each other. That was our language. By the time we both got into the University of Ibadan, both of us admitted in the same year, both studying different courses, but treating each other's faculties like extensions of our own, we were more than best friends. The word friendship did not quite hold everything we were to each other. We were family by choice, family by love, family by the accumulation of 15 years of being each other's constant. She was the person I called first when anything happened, good or bad, significant or trivial. She was the person whose opinion I valued more than my own most of the time. She was the only person in the world whose disapproval would have genuinely derailed me. It was in the second semester of our final year that I met Afolabi. He was in the Faculty of Engineering, a tall, quiet man with a specific kind of seriousness that people mistake for arrogance until they get close enough to realize it is actually just focus. The seriousness of someone whose mind is always working on something, always 3 steps ahead. He sat beside me at a mutual friend's birthday gathering in a small restaurant near the campus gate and spent the first hour explaining the structural logic of bridges with the kind of animated passion that made you understand why someone would dedicate their life to a single subject. I spent that first hour pretending to follow, while secretly watching the way his hands moved when he was deep in a subject he cared about, the way they came alive, the specific gestures he used that were almost like punctuation. By the end of the night, he had asked for my number. He did it simply, without the performance that some men put into that moment. He just said, "I would like to talk to you again. May I have your number?" And I said yes, and then I walked to Folasade's room on the other side of campus and sat on her bed and told her everything while she watched me with enormous eyes. She screamed. She grabbed my phone before I had even properly unlocked it, scrolled back through the one brief conversation we had already had, and declared him perfect before she had met him even once. She said, "Yetunde, this one is serious. I can feel it from the fact that he uses full sentences and does not start a message with the letter K." We laughed about that for days. She made it a criterion from then on. Any man who responded to full sentences with just the letter K was automatically disqualified. We called it the K rule. She met him 2 months later when the 3 of us went for suya at the small spot we always went to near the university gate, the one where the suya man knew your order by face, and the plastic chairs had been replaced enough times that they were never quite the same color twice. I watched Folasade carefully that evening, the way I always watched the people I loved meet each other, half hoping they would get along beautifully, half nervous they would be awkward in a way I would spend weeks managing. Afolabi was polite and genuinely funny in the measured way he was always funny, not performing for the table, not doing anything for effect, just warm and real when the moment called for it. Folasade was her usual self, which is to say she was electric. She asked him impossible hypothetical questions designed to test whether a person had a real personality. Questions like, "You are in an elevator with the most powerful man in Nigeria, and you have 30 seconds. What do you say?" And she watched his answer with the careful attention of a doctor taking a reading. By the end of the night, she gave me her verdict on the walk back. She said, "He is a good man, a serious man, not a man who is trying to impress you, a man who is simply being himself and trusting that it is enough. That kind is the rarest kind. Hold on to him, Yetunde. Do not let that one go." I held on. We dated for 3 years after graduation. Long distance for part of it. He moved to Lagos for his NYSC posting, and I remained in Ibadan completing my master's degree. And the geography between us was both a real difficulty and a strange gift. We called every night without exception. On the nights when I was exhausted and he was buried under work, and we had only 15 minutes before one of us needed to sleep, we still called. We visited every other weekend when we could, taking the bus in both directions across a road that never felt short enough. We argued about small things, about what we had each meant by something said or not said, about whose turn it was to make the effort, about the particular loneliness that comes with loving someone you cannot reach without planning it in advance. And we forgave each other, quickly usually. Afolabi was not a person who held grudges. This was one of the things I love most about him. Once he was done being hurt or frustrated, he was genuinely done. He did not stockpile grievances. He did not revisit old arguments with new material. He resolved a thing and left it resolved. I admired that about him, and I was also at times jealous of it, because I am not built that way. I carry things longer than I should. I circle back. I need to understand everything fully before I can truly leave it alone. When he proposed, we were at a restaurant in Lagos on a Saturday evening in January. There was no grand production. He had not hired anyone, had not arranged a flash mob, had not filled the table with rose petals or coordinated with the restaurant to do anything theatrical. It was just us, a table by the window, the kind of quiet evening that felt like all our evenings, easy and real and entirely ours. He reached into his jacket pocket and placed the ring on the table between our plates, and he said, "I want to build everything with you, and I want it to be official so that the whole world knows. Will you?" I said yes before the sentence was fully over. I was crying before he even opened the box properly. The wedding planning was a kind of beautiful chaos. My mother threw herself into it with the focused energy of a woman who had been mentally organizing this occasion since I was approximately 8 years old and had finally been given the green light. Afolabi's family came from Ekiti, a large, warm, magnificently noisy family who welcomed me with a feast that lasted all afternoon and prayers that went into the night, praying over me as though they were anointing a new member of a dynasty, which in a way I suppose they were. His aunties looked at me with sharp eyes and then with soft ones, as though I had passed an assessment I had not known I was taking. His mother held my hands when everyone else had gone and told me, "Yetunde, take care of my son." And then she said, "He is not easy when he is hurting. Do not give up on him when he goes quiet. He comes back. He always comes back." I told her I understood. I meant it. And through all of it, every fabric selection, every caterer meeting, every argument about seating arrangements, every 3 in the morning panic about something that had gone wrong with the planning, Folasade was there. She was my maid of honor in every sense the title has ever meant and more. She was my coordinator, my crisis manager, my chief problem solver, my emotional anchor. There were 3 separate times in the month before the wedding when I broke down completely, crying on the floor of wherever I happened to be at the time, convinced that something was going to go terribly wrong, that I was not ready, that I was missing something important. Folasade talked me down every single time. She did not tell me my fears were silly. She sat with me in them, acknowledged them, and then helped me find my way back to steady ground. She would hold my hands and say, Yetunde, look at me. You are ready. You have always been ready for this. This is yours. The wedding was a Saturday in December. The weather was the best version of December weather in Ibadan. Dry and warm, the harmattan soft enough to carry a little romance without being harsh about it. The kind of weather that makes you feel like the universe is cooperating. The church was full. The colors we had chosen, gold and ivory with a thread of deep green, looked exactly as we had imagined them, which almost never happens and felt like a gift. I walked down that aisle on my father's arm and saw Afolabi standing at the far end of it, and something happened in my chest that I have never been able to describe properly. It was not excitement exactly, though there was excitement in it. It was more like recognition, like arriving somewhere you have been moving toward for a long time without knowing it. And the moment you arrive, your whole body says, yes, here, this is it. Folasade stood to my left through the entire ceremony. She cried before I did. She held my bouquet with both hands and smoothed the ribbon with her thumb, and I remember glancing at her during the prayers and seeing that her face was completely undone by feeling, tears running openly down her cheeks, not even trying to hide it. I loved her so much in that moment. I thought, this is what it means to have a person. Someone who shows up not for her own sake, but for yours, who is genuinely moved by your joy as if it were her own. The reception was everything we had imagined, and also better than we had imagined in the specific way that good days always manage to exceed themselves. We ate and danced and laughed, and then danced again. Family and friends filled the space and made it alive. The music was perfect. The food was better than perfect. And Folasade gave a toast that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. She stood up in her gold bridesmaid's dress with a microphone in one hand and a glass in the other, and she spoke about our friendship in a way that made grown men sit up straighter and lean forward. She said that she had known me since I was 6 years old, and that in all that time she had watched me love people with my whole heart, hold nothing back, give everything to the people who mattered to her. She said that Afolabi was the luckiest man she had ever met because he was going to spend his life being loved by me. She said God had given me two great loves in this life, my husband and my friendship with her, and she prayed that both would last until our hair was white and our knees had forgotten how to dance. The whole room erupted. Afolabi's uncles, who were old Ikiti men and not the type to make visible displays of emotion, wiped their eyes. My mother was weeping. My father started to say something and could not finish it. Afolabi looked at Folasade across the room with genuine warmth and mouthed, "Thank you." That night, when we were finally alone, I told Afolabi I had never been happier in my life. He held my face in both hands, the way he sometimes did when he wanted me to know he was fully present with me, and he said, "Neither have I." And I believed him. I felt it from him. It was real. The first year of marriage was not without its adjustments, because no marriage is, but it was good. We settled into Lagos life, into our small apartment in Surulere that barely held everything we owned, but that we made warm and ours. We were learning each other's rhythms in the specific, detailed way that cohabitation demands, that he needed quiet in the mornings, real quiet, almost meditative, before he could function as a social human being, while I processed the day by talking about it from the moment I opened my eyes. That he handled money with almost terrifying discipline, keeping spreadsheets of everything, tracking every expense with the precision of someone auditing a company, while I had to be reminded periodically to check whether my account could actually afford what I was about to do. That when he was hurt or worried or overwhelmed, he went interior, withdrew, became very still, said very little, while I needed conversation the way some people need medication. And the space between his closing inward and my need to reach him was the geography where our first real conflicts happened. Folasade visited often in that first year. She was still in Ibadan, working as a school administrator, but she came to Lagos every 2 or 3 months, and when she did, the apartment felt fuller. She cooked, always something spectacular, spending the entire afternoon in our small kitchen producing food that lasted us days. She teased Afolabi without mercy about things she found absurd, and he took it with good humor, and watching the two of them banter across our dining table gave me a specific pleasure that I can only describe as abundance, the feeling of being rich in the people who matter. In the second year, things started to change. The changes were not dramatic at first. They crept in the way things crept when you are busy and trying to keep up with the pace of your life. Afolabi's workload became punishing. He had been brought onto a large government infrastructure project, and the demands were unlike anything he had faced before. He started coming home late, not the occasional lateness that is part of Lagos life, but genuinely late, hours late, the kind of late where your dinner has been sitting on the stove long enough to go from warm to cold and back to being reheated. He came home exhausted in a way that was more than physical. He was tired in his spirit. He had less to say. He sat in silence more. When I asked about his day, he gave me the briefest true answer he could, and then retreated somewhere inside himself that I could not easily reach. I was patient. I understood the pressure. I told myself that this was temporary, that the project would end, that the man I had married was still fully there and would come back when the weight lifted. But patience, held for too long without acknowledgement or relief, eventually becomes loneliness, and loneliness inside a marriage is different from loneliness on your own. When you are alone, you are simply alone. When you are lonely inside a marriage, you are invisible in a way that is harder to name and harder to bear, because you are technically surrounded, technically held, but somehow still completely unreached. I talked to Folasade about all of it. I want you to understand this clearly. I told Folasade everything, about the long silences, about the evenings I spent on my side of our bed staring at the ceiling while he slept, about the arguments that were becoming more frequent, about small triggers that suddenly held enormous weight, about the feeling which I confided in her with a degree of shame because I was not sure I had a right to it, that I was disappearing in my own marriage, that Afolabi saw me but was not looking at me, that we were coexisting in the same space but had stopped truly meeting inside it. She listened. She always listened with her full attention, her eyes steady on me, her responses unhurried. She told me, every marriage passes through seasons, that the dry season was not the death of things, but just a part of the cycle, that what I was experiencing was normal and survivable. She told me to hold on, to keep showing up, to love him even when the love felt unreciprocated. She said, Yetunde, fight for your marriage, not against him, for it, the both of you together against whatever is pulling you apart. I followed her advice. I tried to be more patient. I tried to create opportunities for connection, to plan evenings that might get us back to something. I wrote him a letter once, a real handwritten letter, which is not something either of us would normally do, telling him everything I loved about him and everything I missed, and asking him to come back to me. He read it on a Sunday morning and came to find me in the kitchen and held me without saying anything for a long time. It felt like progress, like something turning. But what I did not know, what I had no way of knowing, because I trusted too completely to suspect, was that every word I was saying to Folasade was being absorbed and processed and used. Not all at once, not in a cruel and calculated way perhaps, but used nonetheless. She knew, because I had told her, every place where I had fallen short. She knew where Afolabi felt unseen, where he felt unmet, what he needed that he was not getting. She had a map of my marriage from the inside, drawn in my own hand, given in trust, and she was using it to find her way in. The first sign I had was at a family gathering at Afolabi's cousin's house in Lekki. Folasade had come to Lagos for the weekend, and I brought her along, as I often did. Halfway through the evening, I noticed something I had not noticed before. Afolabi was laughing. This does not sound like a significant thing, but listen. He laughed differently around her than he had been laughing with me for months. Easier, looser. The way he used to laugh with me in the early days of our marriage, before the project and the pressure had sealed something off in him. I noticed it, and I tucked the noticing away, and I told myself I was inventing problems where there were none. Folasade was funny. He liked humor. It was nothing. The second sign came when I picked up his phone to check the time while he was in the shower, and the screen lit up with a message from her. Just checking in. Yetunde mentioned you were working through lunch again. Want to make sure you are eating. Simple, warm, the exact thing a caring mutual friend might send. But she had not told me she was messaging him separately. She knew his schedule because I had described it to her in detail. She was using information I had given her to insert herself directly into his day, around me, without me. I put the phone down. I told myself it was nothing. I was lying to myself. The third sign was the one I could not tuck away. I came home from work early on a Wednesday afternoon because I had a migraine that had been building since noon and the office had become unbearable. I opened our front door with my key and found Folasade sitting in our living room. She had a key. I had given it to her years before in the easy confidence of friendship, and she used it occasionally when she was in Lagos and I was working late and she needed somewhere to wait. But Afolabi was also there. He was almost never home at that hour, and when I walked in, something happened. It is difficult to explain this to someone who has not experienced it, but there is a particular change in the energy of a room when something in it suddenly becomes aware it has been caught in a feeling it should not be in. It is not about what anyone is doing. It is something subtler, a kind of adjustment, an almost imperceptible gathering of composure. Folasade stood immediately and said she had just stopped by to drop something and she should get going. She hugged me. Her hug was exactly as it had always been, warm, tight, familiar, and that familiarity made it worse somehow. Afolabi said he had come home to collect some documents. He made me tea and checked on my migraine and was genuinely attentive for the rest of the evening. That night I lay in the dark and listened to the sound of his breathing and felt the floor shift beneath everything I had built. I did not say anything to either of them. I could not, because to say something out loud was to make it exist officially, and I was not ready to look directly at what I was beginning to understand. I kept the knowledge at the edges of my consciousness, not quite letting it form into words, not quite letting it harden into certainty. This is what you do when the truth is too large and too terrible. You hold it at the periphery and pretend you do not see it, hoping that if you do not acknowledge it, it will somehow unmake itself. It did not unmake itself. Mama Biodun was our neighbor, a retired civil servant, stout and deliberate in everything she did, a woman who observed the world around her with the quiet precision of someone who has decided that being a witness to other people's lives is its own form of responsibility. She had lived in that compound longer than anyone else. She knew the sound of every door. She knew who came and went, and at what hours. She knocked on my door on a Tuesday morning when Afolabi was at work and I was working from home. She came in, sat down in the chair closest to the door, as though she planned to leave quickly once she had said what she came to say, and looked at me directly. She said she did not believe it was her business to carry other people's trouble. But she also said she could not watch someone she respected walk into a hole she could clearly see. She told me that my best friend had been coming to this building when I was not here. Not once or twice, over the past several months. Coming in the evenings, after dark, and leaving before the morning fully arrived. She said she had seen it more times than she wanted to count, and she had prayed about it for a long time before deciding that silence in this particular situation was not neutrality. It was a kind of harm. I do not have complete access to the next 2 hours. Memory does strange things to the moments that break it. I remember ending up on the kitchen floor at some point, sitting against the cabinet under the sink. I remember calling my older sister in Ibadan and not being able to produce words when she answered, just a sound, and her sitting on the phone saying my name softly over and over until something in me reconnected and I could speak. I remember thinking with a strange detached clarity about the bouquet, about the way Folasade had held my wedding bouquet during the ceremony, smoothing the ribbon with her thumb while the priest prayed. The intimacy of that, the honor of that, the trust that had been embedded in that one small act. When Afolabi came home that evening, I was at the dining table. I had not moved from it. I had not cooked. I had not done anything for hours except sit and sit and sit. He walked in, saw my face, and stood very still in the doorway for a long moment. And then he set his bag down slowly, the way you set something down when you know what is coming and you are bracing for the weight of it. He did not lie exactly. He went through the stages. He questioned the source first. Who had told me, as though the identity of the person who had pointed at the fire could determine whether the fire was real. When that dissolved, he minimized, said it was complicated, said the situation had not been what it appeared, said that I had been distant, that he had felt alone in our marriage, that things had become so difficult between us, that he had found himself somewhere he should not have been. I sat and let him speak, and with each sentence, I felt something inside me go out the way a candle goes out. Not in drama, not in an explosion, but quietly and completely, with a small thread of smoke, and then simply dark. I called Folasade from the bedroom later that night. She answered on the second ring. When I said her name, there was silence, a long, knowing silence. And then she said, Yetunde, I am so sorry. I did not want it to come out like this. I am so sorry. She did not deny it. She did not fight me. She apologized with a steadiness that told me she had been practicing this conversation in her mind for some time. And that quiet preparedness, the fact that she had a rehearsed apology ready, that she had been living with the knowledge of her own actions long enough to have worked out how she would eventually account for them, reached into me in a way that the betrayal itself had not quite reached. Because it meant she had known. She had known for months what she was doing, and she had continued to sit at my table, eat my food, hold my hands through my fears, call herself my best friend, and let me pour everything I felt into her keeping, all while she was taking something from me that I had not given her permission to take. I ended the call. I sat down on the floor of my bedroom in the dark, and I grieved. Not just the marriage, not just the husband who had made a terrible choice. I grieved for Lasade. I grieved the 6-year-old girl who had poured a whole bottle of water on a boy's head because he hurt me. I grieved the 20-year-old woman who had declared Afolabi good before she even knew him and told me to hold on to him. I grieved the friend who had cried before I did at my own wedding. I grieved 30 years. I grieved the specific comfort of being known by someone from so early in your life that they remember the person you were before you had fully become anyone. That kind of knowledge is irreplaceable. Once it is gone, it is just gone. You cannot rebuild it with anyone new. You can only mourn it. What followed was the kind of season that resists being made into a clean story. Grief does not go in a straight line, and neither did mine. There were weeks of raw pain, and there were weeks of eerie numbness where I went through my days like a woman performing the role of herself in a film she had not agreed to be in. I was angry in ways I had not known I was capable of being angry. Not a loud, expressive anger, but a cold and exhausted one. The kind that has nowhere to go and so turns quietly inward. I was also, without explanation, furious at myself for not seeing it sooner, for trusting so completely, for giving both of them so much of me. My mother came to Lagos when I told her. She sat with me for a week and said very little, which is unusual for my mother, who has opinions about everything and is not shy about them. But she read the situation correctly and understood that what I needed was not analysis. I needed presence. On the last day before she went back to Ibadan, she held my face in her hands and said, "Yetunde, you built your life on yourself first, before you built it on anyone else. Do not let this make you forget that." Afolabi and I tried to repair things briefly. There were long, exhausting conversations, some of which reached something true, and some of which just moved the same pain around. He said things I recognized as real, that we had grown distant, that the years of pressure and silence had taken something from him, that he had felt unseen. I did not dismiss any of it. I believed him because the problems in our marriage had been real. I had lived them too. But I said to him what I needed him to hear. I said, "Afolabi, every marriage has seasons of difficulty. Every marriage has distance and silence and need going unmet. That is not unique to us. The question is not whether we had problems. The question is what you did when the problems came. You could have chosen us. You could have come to me. You could have said what you needed, as hard as that would have been. Instead, you chose to go outside our marriage, and the person you chose is the one I trusted most in my life. That is not something I know how to carry." He had no answer for that. We separated. The divorce took a year. It was painful in the administrative, procedural way that all endings are painful. The paperwork, the distribution of a shared life into separate boxes, the moment of handing back a key. But in a deeper sense, the marriage had ended on the night I sat at that dining table and watched him carry his bag carefully to the floor. Everything after that was just the formal closing of a door that had already swung shut. Folasade married Afolabi 6 months after our divorce was finalized. I learned about it the way you learn things in Lagos, through the network of shared connections that ties everyone to everyone, a friend of a friend, a phone call with a careful voice, the kind of careful that tells you the person delivering the news is genuinely unsure what it will do to you. They had a small ceremony, no large celebration, no photographs plastered across social media, no fanfare. Perhaps because they understood that no celebration of this beginning could be made to look clean. I was not invited. Of course I was not. I was not notified. I simply found out, the way you eventually find out the things you were not meant to know. I sat in my apartment in Surulere and I let it land. The grief that came that day was different from the earlier grief. It was quieter, duller in its edges. The early grief had been sharp and wild, the kind of pain that screams and moves through you like weather. This was more like the feeling of watching the last ship leave the harbor, not surprise, not explosion, just the quiet, aching acknowledgement that something which had been possible was now definitively not. Here is what I kept returning to in the weeks that followed. All those conversations. Every single thing I had told Folasade about my marriage. Every moment I had described Afolabi's specific kind of silence. His way of shutting down when he was struggling. The exact thing I needed from him that I was not getting. The exact thing he needed from me. She had absorbed all of it. She had used it, perhaps not deliberately, perhaps not with the cold strategy of a villain in a film, but she had used it the way you use a map when you want to find your way somewhere. She knew precisely where I had fallen short because I had told her. She knew precisely what he needed because I had told her. I had handed her the interior of my marriage, and she had walked in through a door I had not realized I was leaving open. The deepest wound I discovered was not the loss of the husband. It was the loss of the ability to trust my own intimacy. Because the very thing I valued most in myself, the capacity to be open, to know people truly and be truly known by them, to give the interior of myself freely to the people I loved, that thing had become the instrument of my undoing. And I was afraid, for a long time, that I would never be able to do it again, that I would spend the rest of my life behind glass, present but protected, seen but never fully reached. I moved to a new apartment in Yaba, a place that was entirely mine, chosen by me, furnished by me, shaped around my preferences and no one else's. I painted one wall a color my mother thought was too bold. I put books everywhere. I grew things on the balcony, herbs first, then flowers, then things that required more attention, and taught me the specific patience of keeping something alive through daily small acts. I started cooking properly, calling my mother on weekends for recipes I had grown up eating but never learned to make myself, rediscovering the pleasure of producing something from scratch. I reconnected with people I had allowed to drift, university friends, cousins I had not called in years, a colleague who had tried for months to get me to join her book club and to whom I finally said yes. I made new friendships, slowly and with the kind of careful intentionality that loss teaches you. Not closed off, not suspicious, just more conscious, more aware that trust is extended, not automatic, and that the people who receive it should be people who have shown over time that they know what to do with it. My mother asked me, about a year after the divorce, whether I thought I would trust again. Not just romantically, she meant in general, in any direction. Whether what had happened had sealed something permanently in me. I thought about it for a long time before I spoke. I said, Mama, I think the question is really about what I am willing to risk, because there is no version of real connection that does not carry risk. You cannot truly know someone and be truly known without accepting that you might be hurt by them. What happened to me was terrible, and I would not wish it on anyone. But I also know what my life looked like when I was fully in it, when I loved without holding back and trusted completely and let people all the way inside. And I know what it looks like now, when I keep everyone at the right distance to feel safe. The first version was more painful, but it was also bigger, richer, more alive. I want the bigger life, even if it costs me again someday. I want the bigger life. She cried. She held my face between her palms the way she had when I was very small, the way that no one else in the world holds a face the way a mother holds it. And she said something I will not share here because it belongs only to us. But I will tell you that it was exactly right. It was the most exactly right thing anyone has ever said to me. 2 years after the divorce, I met Temitope. I will not tell his full story here because it is still being lived and it belongs to both of us. And I have learned to hold new things more carefully than I once did. But I will say this. He knew my history, before we became anything to each other. He had heard pieces of it, as things get heard in circles of mutual friends, and he asked me about it directly on our third conversation. Not in a probing way, not with the prurient curiosity some people have for other people's disasters, but with a genuine and quiet respect, as though he understood that it was something to be approached carefully. He said, "I heard something of what you went through. You do not have to tell me anything, but I want you to know that I am not afraid of it." I told him eventually, all of it, or as much of it as I had words for by then. He listened the way Folasade used to listen, with full attention, unhurried, steady, and I noticed the similarity and let myself sit with the complexity of that, because the capacity to listen well is not itself a betrayal. Folasade had that gift, and she did something terrible with it. Temitope has that same gift, and he has used it only to see me more clearly. The gift is not the danger. The danger is in the person, not the quality. On a Sunday morning not long ago, we were on my balcony, the one with the herbs and the flowers and the small things that require daily care, drinking tea and watching the street below where Yaba was doing what Yaba always does on Sunday mornings, loud and slow at the same time, the hawkers with their early calls, children in church clothes being walked somewhere, the particular rhythm of a Lagos neighborhood waking up with one eye still closed. He asked me, quietly and without pressure, if I ever missed her. Not Afolabi, Folasade. I was silent for long enough that he looked over to check that I was all right. And then I said, yes. I said, I miss her, the way you miss a version of the world that no longer exists. The world in which she was who I believed her to be. The world in which I had a person who had known me since I was 6 years old and would know me until we were old women, complaining about our knees and arguing about nothing and loving each other across decades. That world was beautiful. I lived in that world for 30 years, and I miss it with a grief that has no clean end to it. He held my hand. He did not try to fix it. He did not offer me a neater way to feel about it. He simply held my hand and let the grief be present between us, and the fact that he could sit with my grief without flinching from it told me everything I needed to know about the kind of person he was. I want to say something directly to whoever is sitting with their own version of this story. You are allowed to grieve it fully. Do not skip ahead to the lesson because it looks stronger. Do not rush yourself toward being healed because someone else's timeline says you should be further along by now. The pain is not weakness. It is the honest response of a person who loved completely and was hurt by that love. Sit with it. Let it be what it is for as long as it needs to be. But also, and I am asking you to hear this, even if it takes time before you are ready to receive it, do not let someone else's betrayal write the final sentence of who you are. The love you gave was real. The marriage you built was real. The friendship you kept for decades was real. The joy you felt on your best days was real. None of those things became false because of what came after. No one can reach backward through time and unmake what was genuine in you. I walked down that aisle in good faith. I stood at that altar with a full heart. I loved my husband honestly, and I loved my best friend honestly, and I gave both of them the best of who I was, freely and without reservation. What they did with what I gave them is their reckoning, not mine. Their choices belong to them. My love, the love itself, the quality of it, the reality of it, that belongs to me and cannot be taken. My name is Yetunde. I was a bride. I was a wife. I was someone's best friend. I was betrayed by the person I trusted most in the world, and I have survived it, and I am still here, and I am still, after everything, someone who is capable of choosing the larger life. If you have ever loved someone the way I loved Folasade, with that total, reckless certainty that they are yours and you are theirs, and the world cannot reach you while you have each other, then you already know something that many people spend their whole lives searching for. You have known what it is to be truly seen by another person. You have known belonging. That is not taken from you by betrayal. It was real when it was real. Let it have been real. Do not let the ending rewrite everything that came before it. Hold what was beautiful. Let it stay beautiful even now, even alongside the pain. Grief and gratitude can live in the same house. You do not have to choose. And then, when you are ready, not when anyone else thinks you should be, not on any timeline but your own, take a breath and keep walking forward into the life that is still entirely and completely yours.